and welcome everybody to the Filmmakers Live. My name is Joanne Butcher. I'm a business coach for filmmakers, and I help filmmakers build their careers by learning how to raise money and produce their films. And usually we have a few minutes before we start. So I haven't even had a chance to say, hi, Gary.
Hi,
So good to see
Joanne.
you
So nice to
after
see you.
such a long time.
It has been, yes.
It's
You
been a
look
very long.
great.
Thank you, and you. And
Thank you.
I've just moved back to Miami, so
Oh,
maybe I'll
really?
see you down here
I
one
was just
day.
there last week.
Well, next time. Next time.
Yep.
So the reason that we don't usually read the bio is because I like to start very much at the beginning, and I like to ask, when was the first time you knew you were a filmmaker?
Uh, well, I don't know if I knew I was a filmmaker. I was a music major back in the
Uh-huh.
day. And
Uh-huh.
I was studying music. I was in the music department at Queens College. And after being there for about a year, standing next to these prodigies every day. I had been playing music all my life, and but I was a rock and roller, and I was just looking to improve my
Uh-huh.
musical abilities,
Uh-huh.
and that seemed to be a good place to go to keep my 1A or to my 1S, whatever it was. I was avoiding the draft. I'm an old guy. We're talking like 1969, 70, 71,
Uh-huh.
when that
Right.
stuff was still in power. So uh, I had lost my designation, and by going to Queens College and doing that, I retrieved it. So I kept myself out of the draft. But ultimately, I pulled a 212 in the lottery, and I was cool. But after
Wow.
being there, yeah, after being there for a while, I realized that my purpose of going there was to improve myself. But I was next to all these people who were literally prodigies, and I was learning a lot. Though I can't, you want to learn, play up, you know, and literally found myself in choirs and things like that, and stuff I had never done. So yeah, I was really learning things that I had never experienced before. So that was great. But what it also did for me is it introduced me to electronic music in the early days, which we'll come
Mm.
back into the story in a little bit when we get to
Mhm.
MADMAN. But in those days, we were making electronic music with punch cards. Okay, we would sit down, all the parameters of a sound, pitch and length and all the timbre and all that stuff,
Right.
everything had to be put into a punch card. And then we
Wow.
would load them up in the computer's mainframe, and over the weekend it would transfer them into something, and we'd do a
Wow.
D to A conversion, and it would literally take a weekend to get 30 seconds worth of music out of that. And most of that was beep, boop, pop, pop. It wasn't anything like we have now, but it was a great introduction to I was very much interested in sound in those days, and I was working as a sound guy doing boom work as well as other things. So it was very useful.
I just want to say that's so
Yeah.
interesting. So my first experience with film was Super 8, three
Mm-hmm.
minute Super 8 cartridges. And I feel as though the limitation of the form was a great learning experience, because nowadays people don't have to think about how much they're shooting or anything like that. But we had 3 minutes to do whatever we wanted to do in. And so when you're just talking about the punch cards and all of that time, do you think that that had an impact in the long term on your work, because you had to say something in such a short time, and it costs so much in a way, cost in
Time.
time, and
Honestly, it 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 had an impact in the sense of I don't want to do it this way.
oh, all right.
Okay, this is not, I fully believe that art and creativity is a function of restriction, and
Uh-huh.
unlimited things,
Right.
can be difficult unless you're super disciplined and
Yes.
can pull it off. It's hard to create art or craft or anything like that.
Yeah.
That was just a great lesson in the granular aspects of music, to think about it on that level. In that respect, it was useful. Okay, every sound has these
Yes.
parameters.
Yes.
So every note, means a card that shows its pitch and its duration and it's all these different things. So it got me into that world, but it was much too cumbersome a project, way beyond what you were doing. I mean, a couple of us, one or two people did something that had more interesting stuff. Literally what came out of my thing was beep bop boop bop and a couple of little notes and stuff, you know, which possibly a good artist would have turned into something, and you know, whatever. But then we also had Buchlas and Moogs and all the cool stuff in the studio there, and I got very deeply involved with fooling around with that. There was as yet no keyboards involved at this point. It was still just plugging and doing, which now is coming back in a big way. Everybody wants to have an analog system and wires and shit hanging out of their stuff. So it's interesting. And just to say again, what's interesting about that, that was in 1974, okay? That got me into that. When I got to make MADMAN in 1979 into 80, when I was going into production, I vowed that I would do a fully electronic score. Oh. And that's what we did. We ended up doing a fully electronic music score. I did it with a great electronic musician, Stephen Horlick, who went on from me and doing that to become the chief composer for Reading Rainbow. Go figure, from my horror film to Reading Rainbow.
MADMAN. Reading Rainbow, that's
yes,
great.
These are the crazy. And he's actually
so scared they're going to be pigeonholed, and what if I do horror, I'm going to be pigeonholed to horror.
No, I discovered him at the Kitchen. If you remember I don't know if you remember the Kitchen back in those days. He and his electronic music band was 4 synthesis doing something. Right. It was quite fun. And I was hunting around all over the city looking for the right kind of person to collaborate with me. I'd already written a bunch of themes and done stuff, but it was too much to take on. I mean, I would have tried to, but it was too much. So I passed it on to him to do the real work. And then he won a Grammy for Reading Rainbow, and eventually. And his wife and him, there's a new documentary out you might want to hunt down, all about the success of Reading Rainbow. So that's just hit the streets recently. Anyway, so that's what happened there. And it was, you know, and my dictate to him, or my dictate is probably too harsh a word, but my notes to him was, I don't want you to recreate an orchestra. I want you to find electronics that expresses what we're dealing with here without trying to make it a violin. There's definitely orchestralness to it, but it wasn't to try to do that. I was trying to find new ways to get into emotion and get into action and fear and all that with his stuff. You know, lots of it still sounds like instruments, but there are a couple of great moments there. You know, my idols back in the day were like, you know, Igor Stravinsky and Rite of Spring, and there were pieces in that. And also for the horror film, Pulse the Planets had the Mars section of it. And eventually, we ran into some odd problems with MADMAN in this, many of them, and I won't get too lost in this, but we were making our horror film based on a legend that I heard in the Catskill Mountains when I was a kid going to summer camp. It was the Cropsey legend, which many people know, and some people have turned into an actual documentaries and other movies about it.
Yes.
We knew it was public domain, so we never expressed the title of it to anybody. We called our movie The Legend Lives, because we were trying to keep that. So, you know, somebody, you know, one thing I must say, all young filmmakers think everybody's going to steal their ideas.
Right.
And it prevents a lot of people from moving forward more rapidly than they should. There's too much hiding of this stuff. So it's not too often that happens. I can tell one story of which I think it did, but I'll save that for later if anybody wants to know. And it's with a big film like Saw. Anyway, so we're casting. It's August. We're going to shoot up in the Catskills. We're planning to do night shoots. It's a night, all takes place all at night, MADMAN. Young, inexperienced schnooks that we were, we made a schedule that was all night. We didn't think about doing a split day where we could shoot interior, you know, in the daytime and save everybody's lives, you know. So we went on for 6 weeks of nights, you know.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was crazy. But we were in the process of casting, and I'm looking at this thing, and it's late August, and we finally get the money from this guy, and it was one guy backed the movie. After hitting 80 people over the whole time while I was working my job producing industrial films, I'm out talking to accountants at lunch, people's business partners, and and hearing every possible story that any of you have tried to raise money have heard by now, which was, yeah, I was really into doing it, but I'm getting divorced, so I can't do it now. Or my accountant says I can't, or whatever kind of thing. My kids got to go to college, so people were back.
Basement flooded.
Was that?
The basement flooded.
Yeah, anything. Absolutely. Anything you can possibly think of. And in those days, interest rates were like in crazy times. Interest rates were 15%. We talk about inflation. It was insane. But we went into this one guy. I got a tip from my cousin who was a stockbroker, and he gave me some people out of his Rolodex that we thought might be good for it. He owned a baby carriage manufacturing plant. We're meeting with him in this big plant, and he's got this tiny little office, like about 9 by 12, and the rest of the place is making baby carriages. And we're talking to him, and he's an old Eastern European German guy with an accent and everything. But he was interested, and we had the proposal, and we put it on his table, and we had nothing in those days. I mean, the stuff that exists out there now for new filmmakers, the support from all of the various, from people like yourself and Rap Book and all these kind of places. The forms are there, the business plans, you just fill in the template. We had none of that. We had some small amounts of things, but not much. So we had this little, 12-page thing that I had typed out on a IBM Selectric. I was really cool in those days. And
Tipex. No, maybe Tipex was later. Whiteout.
Oh, this had the ball that actually spun around.
The little, that was fancy.
It was wonderful.
Fancy. Yeah.
At any rate, he looks through it and he sees the budget's $400K at that time. And he says, I see you guys have 50,000, 25,000 each for your salary. He said, yeah, well, we were expecting we'd make something for it. He said, well, take your salary out and we can talk more. Well, okay. So suddenly the budget was $350K. So I said, okay, but we have to be able to, then therefore we're going to draw off the picture's budget to pay rent. And my rent in those days was $175 a month. It wasn't exactly killer, and to eat. So those things, he said that was cool. So we go further talking, and he says, what is it you expect from me? And my partner fell off his chair because I said, we want you to back the whole picture. Okay, we were running around trying to sell shares. And suddenly, 25 here, 35 there. And whatever it was, the 80 meetings I had prepared me for this, and practice, if it doesn't make perfect, it makes something that puts you in a different place, makes you better. And whatever it was, I just said, why not? What I didn't even think, it wasn't even like, it just popped out of my mouth. We'd like you to back the whole movie. We think you're the kind of guy that wouldn't need other people to do this. You'd like to operate directly with us. And he said, okay, all right, I'll do it. This is after a little bit of back and forth and a couple of shots of scotch that he was sharing with us. And he said, well, have your lawyer contact my lawyer and we'll get them to work on it and we'll get this thing off the ground. So as I said, it was August and we were planning to do a shoot in the Catskills and we were planning to go night, which meant temperature drop. So I immediately looked at that and I said, well, this is going to take us, and the lawyers get their hands on this, they're going to need to make their money. It's going to be, by the time we get a deal, it's going to be mid-September, and then by the time I get it up and done and running, cast, we're going to be in the middle of October. It's going to be too cold to work. Mm-hmm. I said, if you're really interested in this, and then I'm on your side. I mean, we're on a team together. I'm counseling us as your team leader here. And I'm saying, I need $20,000 from you right now, so I can open up a production office and begin to cast and to begin to get this thing moving. By the time the lawyers get done, we'll be ready to go. We won't lose the time and we won't get frozen to death. So he wrote me a check on the spot for 20 grand. First time we ever met. And it was really amazing to me. Yeah, it was one. Look, I looked at my partner when we were dancing Ring Around the Rosie in the parking lot when we got out there and said, this may never, in fact, this will never happen again. and here we are 40 years later, and it has not happened in that way again.
Wow. you were saying earlier you went to college, for music, and it sounded like 5 years later you're out here,
Okay, I
finding.
jumped. Okay, I'll move
No,
on
but
now.
so I just wanted to know how, because a lot of people go to film school and don't think to make a feature film. So I just wonder how you went from here to there.
I'm glad you brought that up because I have a tendency to jump around and be erratic.
No, no, no,
So
no, no. It's, no,
no,
it's
it's a
just
good
me. I just want to know.
no, it's a good point. Oh, good. Then maybe that's a good way to tell a story. Make them think. Uh, make them want. So here's the thing. So I was in this music school situation, and I have given you to understand where I was at. And then all of a sudden, I hear about this college that a number of my friends have been going to, called Richmond College in Staten Island. It was the kind of progressive place that a crazy hippie kid like me loved. Pass, fail, and honors grades only. No schedules, no finals, no nothing but your moxie and your desire to do what you wanted to do. They were very open like that. And
Ah,
so I said, oh, this sounds like my kind of school. And they were in Staten Island. At the time, I was living in the East Village, so it meant a ferry back and forth every day, which was
oh,
also a very interesting experience
very
doing that.
nice. Yes.
So I ended up, and we had also heard of friends of ours who were there who were having great success because they were actually giving the students $5,000 a piece to make their student films. So
Wow.
we were all like jacked up. This makes sense. Let's do this. And so myself and my late partner, Joey, who was the director of the movie and the writer of the screenplay from our working out the story, said, okay, we're going here. And, at the time I was also doing theater in the city. I was doing off Broadway stuff on a regular basis, producing things with friends from college and all that kind of stuff. So off I go and I switch over because I decide that, films has always been movies. My dad took me all the time and I really were into them. And he was a sort of a odd aficionado. He could tell you the third extra from the left, what other movies
Wow.
he'd seen them in. And he remembered everybody. He sort of looked like Cary Grant in his own right. And he had a very
Wow.
vibrant personality in those days. So I was drawn to movies. There was a lot of movies and watching and that kind of stuff. So I made the transfer over to Staten Island and started to study film there. I also felt that, I love the music, but I recognized that the music I was there for the reason of upgrading my musical abilities, but it wasn't necessarily where I would go for. I figured, I can combine this. I could, film has music and I could write my own for the movie. And I ended up doing that in MADMAN to some degree. All the songs that are in it are of my own composition, and the themes, that Stephen took off on came from me. So I managed to achieve that when I got to MADMAN.
Nice.
At any rate, so that was a very interesting experience. Our chairman of the department was an Eastern European guy. So we got really vested in Eastern European cinema. His name was Yuri Weiss. And he was like, no, not Yuri Weiss. His name was Antonin Lehm. Yuri Weiss was a director who he brought in. Antonin Lehm was the cultural minister of Czechoslovakia before he fled.
Oh,
So he really knew his Eastern European cinema. And he brought Milos in. He brought in Yuri Weiss. He showed us all these great early movies from Milos Forman's Ball and all these really different kinds of things. I'll never forget some of the great animations. Izzy Trunka had this incredible animation, 4 years, frame by frame, the way it used to be done. So it was very interesting class and we learned a lot. John Hancock was also one of our film professors. At the time, he directed Bang the Drum Slowly, which was one of De Niro's earliest films. And he was directing theater and stuff. So that's where I was going to get I got my film education from there. As far as the idea of film education, we all understand film education. Well, we don't all understand, but film education, there's the film education of getting the 30,000-foot view of the business, the industry, the history, and all of that. And then there's the making of films, which is a different game. Most of the film education in those days, maybe it's different now when you have Full Sail and places like that, where they actually teach you hands-on stuff. But there was really nothing like that then. That came from diving into the industry as a PA or any way you could get in.
right.
And if you're lucky, you had an Uncle Harry and he sucked you in somewhere, but from the ground up. To that end, what got me, beyond that, the wide historical and educational academic aspects of movie making, and all the histories of things, which was great. It's nice to know where things come from, and it's nice to know the history to some degree. But when you're trying to make movies, you really want to understand the process, and that wasn't that good. And then again, we had 16 millimeter. We had the right stuff around to some degree. It wasn't as fat as it is now these days. And also, as most of those who are trying to make films now are younger than most of you, I'm guessing, are of the digital age. Mm-hmm. So you never really had to slog through editing on a flatbed or on a moviola or on any of that stuff. It's much more labor intensive, harder to learn, expensive as shit, and slower. So but we did. I made my student films and I did what I had to do, and that was what we had. So we didn't, we dreamed of other things the way I used to dream of synthesizers when I was in electronic music. And I said, couldn't we just have a keyboard?
Did you get the $5,000
no.
to make the film? No.
Oh, okay. But they gave me, I got something. It was okay. They gave me what I needed. By the time I got to my point, they had they started to narrow it down a little bit. You had a budget a little better. But one of the guys that I knew was that drew me there, that one of our friends, he made a picture. He made something called Along Came John, which he did, and that was a feature, and he got the $5,000 for that. Oh. And so we were going off of his thing. I'm trying to get his name into the front of my head. But then he turned around, and the next picture he made was something called He Knows You're Alone, which was a horror film, which he made for pretty low money. And this is now as the horror film slasher period, as we will look back at it now, the 80s period, whatever. It began in the late 70s, really, with Halloween.
Did I freeze or did Gary freeze?
I have Gary frozen on my end too, unfortunately.
Okay. He'll probably come back. Yeah, anybody who joined us late, Gary Sales is our guest, and he is frozen right now. He's staying with friends, and right before we came on today, his friends tested positive for COVID, and so he was getting tested and all this stuff, and it happened like right before he was supposed to come on. So we have questions in the last 10 minutes, Lee. So, you can ask me a question because he's coming back on. Go ahead, Lee, ask a question. I don't see where you are. I saw it in the chat. Yeah, while we're waiting for Gary to come back, does anybody have any questions? Hello to everybody who is calling in from Trinidad and Tobago. Who else do we have from far away? Who's far away? That's a great question, Lee. I don't know who our next guest is who's coming up. I think it's going to be a music video director.
I'm back. Do you? There I am.
Yeah, okay. There you are. Yay!
Yay! I don't know what happened. We're all, slaves to the internet god or whatever.
He was making his horror film.
Yes, he made He Knows You're Alone.
He Knows You're Alone. That's a great title.
Yeah. By the way, an odd little actor appeared in there in a small walk-on. His name was Tom Hanks.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Things. Anyway, he made it for very low money. And as I say, all the majors, I don't know if I got cut off before I said that, but because Friday the 13th did 60 million and none of the other majors had anything horror on the shelves, suddenly it was a buying spree. And everybody with any sort of horror was going to get picked up for cash immediately. So he went out to Hollywood and he made it for 600. I think they bought it for 1.2 million right off the top.
Wow.
He was in Fat City. And he's gone on to become, his name is jumping out of my head right now, but it'll come to me. He's gone on to become a regular director out there in Hollywood and make other things along those lines. So we decided at the time, we were trying to figure out, my partner Joey Giannone and I were trying to figure out how are we going to get into this business. You know, the choices at the time for new filmmakers were action, adventure, horror, or porn. Porn in the day was a sort of a dead end because it was still mafia run. This is pre-VHS. This is before the idea of what I always refer to as random access video movie literature came to be. So that didn't seem like it could go anywhere with the mafia controlling it all. Action adventure required a little too much money in order to support the action adventure, but horror, all you needed was a decent story and some good effects and you could do it. So we chose horror. And of course, Halloween had come out, and that was, to me, the quintessential brilliant, you know, example of how to do horror. I mean, most people will forget this, but there is not one drop of blood in the original Halloween. You never see a knife go into anybody. You never. It's all Hitchcockian suspense and smart directing.
And it's so funny because even today, I just had this conversation with a filmmaker where she was so sort of defensive about the fact that she wants to make a horror film. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. And she's like, well, you know, but it doesn't have all this blood in it. It's not a slasher film. It's not a, I'm like, we're so far past that, you know, there is such a wide range of horror films, you know, and there have been for how many years are we talking here now? 40, 50 years.
Well, yeah, MADMAN is if MADMAN was a car, you could put a vintage plate on it. It's 40. We actually broke New York in 82, let's say. So it's about 40 years old.
Yes.
You know, so yeah, and there's every different kind, and some are better than others. I mean, some take different tacks. I mean, what happened in the slasher period, right away, you could see it went from Carpenter's really deft direction to much less deft direction in the sense of they're going to show blood. And there is a huge, huge audience that really loves blood and guts. It's just a thing, you know? I mean, it seems like it's a planetary thing, actually, but that's another story for a different conversation. So we went out and we tried to walk the line at that point because we realized we had to show something, but we were not into showing, you know, gratuitousness. We were trying to avoid what they were doing with women at the time, which was making them the object of stalking and all that stuff. So we had all of these highfalutin ideas, you know, whatever you want to call it these days, these woke ideas of trying to do it better. And we did. We made it so that we didn't want to show him right away. We figured your imagination is better than what we could show you, and we gave tiny glimpses and let people do it. We did the best we could with effects to not linger too long and do it right. And it seemed to work for the audiences in the day. And that was, you know, and again, I'll give you a quick story here. This, you know, every movie has its stories. There's no movie that gets made without some kind of crazy story. So we finally get the money, we're casting, and and it's now like the beginning of September, and I'm getting nervous here. We got to get our asses on this thing. And we're starting to hear from people coming in. This sounds very familiar to me. I was doing this. I read for something similar to this with lines and a kind of theme like this. And then one day this girl walks in and says, you know, I was reading with my boyfriend to help him. He's working on this movie now up in Buffalo. And I'll be damned if this doesn't seem like exactly the kind of thing that he's doing up there. So we got the name of the film from her, a production manager, great guy, the late Mark Silverman, who was, he was the production manager for the Coen Brothers back in the day for Blood Simple. He reached out, knew the other production manager, found it, got us the script. We take a look at it, we read it, and holy shit, they're doing a similar version of the Cropsey Legend without necessarily in that name.
Wow.
But what was more outrageous, which didn't really mean much at the time, it was a movie called The Burning. If you know your horror, yeah, well, if you know your horror, that's the first movie that Harvey and Bob Weinstein produced.
Oh.
Okay, so that was the Miramax boys, before they were Miramax in their
Well,
first
they were
movie.
Miramax, yeah.
Yeah, and they had a great little bunch of stars in there. Richard Dreyfuss is in it. Holly Hunter is in it. They had we went non-SAG. We couldn't afford it.
Right.
We managed to make a deal with somebody who was SAG, who was a star in Dawn of the Dead, Galen Ross, and she was our star under a different name. She did that, and so we had some face that everybody recognized, but we chose not to go SAG. We didn't think we could afford it, and so anyway, that's the tale there. So that was really interesting to find that out. Meanwhile, at the same time, we're looking at the temperatures, and I'm starting to say, oh my God, I'm looking at it. It's already projected to be like down at 9 degrees, by the time we want to start shooting. So I send the location manager out, and I take a map, and I do a little radius thing, and I say, okay, anywhere within 50 miles of Manhattan, find me something. And he goes out there, and while we're doing all the other pre-production and getting everything else set up, he comes up with some place way out on Long Island, which turned out to be a fantastic, perfect location for us. It was a little place called Fish Cove Inn that was run by this guy, Jimmy. What?
I said, I love it already.
Yeah, it was very cute. It's out there in West Hampton, actually. And the guy that owned it was a guy named Jimmy Lodato, who had spent the previous 5 years as the business manager of the baby guru, of the little baby guru at the time that was running around the world. Okay, and he was managing his Rolls Royces and his property and the money coming in, and he bought this place. He had left that business behind, and with whatever money he had, he took him and his wild family, because these are kids who had been traveling the world since birth, in their before they were 13, they'd been around the world twice. Right. So they had some very wild ideas and interesting stuff. And when we got there, what's on the property? There are teepees and shamans and all this kind of cool shit that he was supporting in this place. But it meanwhile had its big, beautiful main house, which if you watch the movie, you'll see it, which served us very well. And it had a bunch of cabins, and it had woods, and it had a lake. And so we were in business, and we never had to move the company, because that was always
to be out deep in the woods with the snow or something.
Well, we had other problems. I mean, as we were shooting, fall was coming, and the leaves and we were stomping through our own sets. And so the leaves on the trees were starting to drop, and literally every PA and prop person had a can of green paint in their pocket. And they would going around, if something was in the background of a shot and we could see it, they were spray painting it green so that we would maintain that. And we would, next night, we'd move over, we'd turn the camera and we'd go, woods is woods for the most part. We turned it 15 degrees so we could see a cleaner spot that we hadn't stomped through. So it was pretty nutty, but you just keep going. You just keep,
that's to be creative. You have to be creative.
Well, and you have to be tough. You really have to be. You have to have some. It's not like going to the bank 9 to 5. Which, by the way, I'll take this moment to say to people, because if young filmmakers, and I've lectured at U of M and at NYU and at Miami-Dade College, people go into the business. We're all attracted by what's obviously the excitement and the glamour of it and all that stuff, and the creativity, especially now, which really puts you in a position to do amazing stuff without leaving your bedroom. But if you want to if you have to think about what kind of life you want to live, in the sense that it's depending on what you choose, it invades your lifestyle completely or less. Okay, in that sense, what I'm saying is, if you want to be home for dinner every night, right, at 6 p.m., you don't want to do feature films, you don't want to do TV series. You might want to do a sitcom. Sitcoms are banker's hours for the most part, and you got a Monday to Friday week, and you can be with the family. When you're off, when you're on hiatus, that's like a real job. But most of the other movie making things, and now there's all this other stuff of content. It's a different kind of a world for creating. You can choose maybe to some degree to control your world, but if you're in features and TV series, that's never ending. You're never around, and it's something that I often kind of. It's something that I consider, and at this age right now, what I've recently done is I have a little more time on my hands. I'm being a little more selective with jobs. I I've actually reverted back to picking up electronic music, and I've got a whole studio that I've been writing again, and literally going through 40 years of material that I had that was sitting on the side. So that's been a lot of fun. But
Well, it's
basically, that's
also
important.
like when
Yeah.
I first met you and your daughter was very, very young,
Yeah.
you know, and when you get on one of these big feature films and it goes on for months and months and months, and you might be away from home and the
All
right
of,
was
yeah.
working and all of those things to consider when you're talking about what's the kind of life you want to create, that's a lot to handle.
Yeah, and you have to have a significant other who is willing to put up with that. And I'm lucky my wife is an actor, so she dug it. You know, I had friends, good prop man friend of mine from Miami. His marriage lasted about 9 months.
Mm,
She was a school teacher, and he was that, and he just could not. You know, she had regularity, he had none, and going away for months at a time. You know, look, you know, just ask any Brit whose parent was a sailor or anything like that, you know, and they're gone. That's kind of a lifestyle.
mhm,
If
mhm.
you're when you're single and you're early in the career, it's great. Can't beat it for that. I mean, you got nobody to answer to, and it takes you places you would never get to on somebody else's dime. So it's it's a great thing. But if you're trying to settle into a real life, and if you want, I mean, unless you're super brilliant and can write really fast or do things really quickly, I've always found that what would happen is if once I get, you know, the good side of it is like, yeah, I'm working for 3-4 months on a movie and then I'm off until something else books. And if it doesn't come right away, then I got time and I'll jump in to try to work on a script and pick up from it. But that was, for me, it was very hard to do, to find my way back to where I left off after
Mm,
time away.
right,
And your energy is very different. It's left brain, right brain, it's all this different stuff. So
right.
regularity, I had no regularity because I was also in the middle, I would end up doing commercials or music video. So those were great because, you know, 3 to 5 days, 10 days at most, you know, that was nice. I could stay mostly around. But nonetheless, it, you know, at least the way I work in the jobs that I was doing, it was consuming to me all the time. You know, 16-hour day, come home. There wasn't really much else I could do but
Right.
eat, sleep, and watch TV and hang around with my daughter and, you know, sing songs to her to put her to sleep when I was able to. Um, Now she's like 28, almost 29, and doing great. So somehow she survived that world.
Yeah, she did. She did.
They do, but it does interfere, you know, in that respect. Commercials is another thing that you can do if you want your weekends off. Generally, unless you're going out of town, you can. That'll keep you somewhat stable, and it pays the highest of most of these things, unless
Right.
you get into big time. I mean, TV series is great in the sense that it's the most regular of paying. So you can go on, a good series can run you 5 years or more if you get in it, and it's constant
Right.
regularity. And there, you know, you're off on hiatus time, and you can make those kind of plans. But in between, you're a slave to that, and you have what they call Fraturday, which is you work Friday. You know, you start Monday morning at 4 a.m. for an early call. By the time you get to Friday, you've moved into nights, and you're shooting till 6 in the morning. So by the time you get your sleep and everything, you're waking up in the middle of the day on Saturday, and you're going back to work in Monday. You know, even on union rules will help you a little, but still you
Uh-huh.
end up kind of losing a good deal of sleep and rest and all that kind of stuff. So
Did did you ever have an experience of working on a long-term show? Is that
no, none
something?
of the series, sadly, or whatever, none of the series that I did got picked up for long term.
Right.
And
Right.
so unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately for my bank account, uh, they, you know, they didn't run for the long periods. But I've got friends who've been on, you know, who were on the Americans from the beginning, you
Ah,
know, and on
right.
other shows. And you then can kind of, you can settle in your life a little bit, but still you put up with the day-to-day, week-to-week
Yes.
thing, you know, and that's
Yes.
difficult. Um, so there's stuff there. Look, the
With
business has,
MADMAN, once you completed it, were you able to get a really good sale? Like you were giving us the example, because there was such a desire for the
yes.
horror content.
All right. When we were doing Madman, it was like, again, coming to the conclusion, cutting in, like, we finished it on December 7th or 8th of 1980. I think I woke up in the morning, rap morning, and John Lennon was assassinated. That's the day I remember waking up to that.
Oh,
And So we went through cutting and cutting and cutting, and while this was going on, and back in the city, and I did some checking on the upcoming American film market, which was going to be the 1980 American film market. It was the first time they were bringing it to the United States. It was playing at those times actually out in Europe and France before Cannes and stuff, but they finally got it back to the United States in California. And so we put in to check into that. When I checked to see what kind of horror was going there, there were 15 movies in production. When we got out there were 135. So supply and demand, which always has a place in our system, changed the nature of the advances. So instead of buying you out for the million or whatever, and it also by that point, the weekly, day-to-day, week-to-week horror releases, I think had, kind of worn down the public a little bit, and they were getting more diluted to some degree because there were so many of them, Terror Train and, and Prom Night and this and that. They were just one after another, some much better than others. So that's the normal thing you can expect when we got out there. Mind you, again, VHS just reared its head at that film market. There was no secondary market yet. There was no, back in those days, they referred to the windows of distribution. It's changed in the new manner of things quite a bit, but I mean, you had to be theatrical first, and then the next place you'd go would be well, they didn't have it then, but the next place, you didn't have plastic media like VHS. You went to cable and television, and you worked your way down the markets, and the windows. And the last thing you would do would be, that was how it went. And then you were waiting for them to bring in the money and then do the calculations and see whether or not they made enough. And they'd always find creative ways to suddenly you find out, you see all these fees that are hiding in the distribution reports of, what is a box office watcher or something like that. And they would say, well, we had to put a person at this box office to watch the money changing hands every, on the thing, and that person's getting $500 to sit there for, So, you learned how that went as you went along. There are different terms now, but there are other ways that they can take your money. So we went out to the American film market. We packed them, before we went there, I literally was crazy and I just got nuts, and I called up the presidents of all the major studios. I literally got through to Bob, I forget his last name, at the head of Universal. I figured worst case scenario, he'll blow me off, but he'll throw me down the chain instead of my having to try find my way up the chain. And somebody might hear his name, they might hear his name and not really understand whether I was close to him or not, and treat me with more deference than they normally were. So that's basically what took place there. He got me, a screening time at an LA screening room. And in those days, this is the only ways they saw your picture. There was no video, no DVHS, no way to pass it along over the internet. You had to go get to a screening and show the movie there. And I have some great tales about that. But so that kicked off, okay, we got a date now. Let's start booking our way out to Hollywood. And on Halloween night of that year, Joey and I flew out and landed in Los Angeles to start this game of running around, booking all these different spaces and chasing these things around. And we got to the point where we were a couple of New York dudes, so we weren't like without some street smarts. So we would pay off the projectionists, and they would let us sit in the projection room and watch the screenings. And so we could see what executive came in. And we saw some strange little activities with their secretaries. And we saw people say, okay, put up reel 1. And then all of a sudden, 5 minutes into it, put up reel 4. Put up reel 3. I mean, the whole movie was 5 reels. So it's like, put up reel 3. So they're jumping through the movie and, that kind of stuff. Very few did a full screening. There were a couple that did.
Wow, I've never heard that before. Never heard that they would skip reels.
Oh God, they're all
Oh
on
my
schedules. They
God.
were all on schedules, and there's ton. Back in those days, you couldn't sit home or in your office and watch
Right.
this shit. You had to go out.
You had to go
So,
out. Yes.
so that was very
I,
funny.
I also want to make sure we have at least a few minutes for people to ask questions, Gary.
I'll
I
stop
could
it.
listen to you all day, frankly. I could listen to you all day. And that, as I said, that I have never heard that before
Oh,
about skipping reels.
oh yeah, they do all that kind of stuff.
Because I used to run a cinema. I had projectionists. We had projectors. That's just, just
But you weren't buying. Were you buying?
no, no, we
Oh,
weren't
okay.
buying. We weren't
These
buying.
guys were buying.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
So they were doing that kind of thing.
right. So
Uh,
that if the beginning's okay and the end's okay, then we can buy it. I
Something
guess.
like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And the ending was great. All of it was great. I thought it was good. Look, we shot 35, so we didn't pull any. We went and we got a really good experienced DP, Jimmy Lemo, who shot it. He changed his name too because he was in IA, but he had shot Miss 45, and he had shot stuff for Abel Ferrara,
Uh-huh.
King of New York, that kind of stuff. So he was a well experienced DP. So we had a good look. And he drew the best that we had this great blue cast that everybody loved in the first one. It was the night look, we were all knights. At any rate, I'm trying to do the reboot now, and it's not a reboot, but we're planning to have some day in it. I kind of miss having a little day and stuff, but it's a completely different thing. We're referring to it as inspired by Madman, and anonymous content is repping it. So that's going to help us get into the
Wow,
room.
that's amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, look, after all these years, everybody else has got a freaking reboot. Why don't we?
That's
But
right.
it's not a full reboot. It's a different thing, and we were asked to make something. They liked the other script that I did, which was a kind of a follow the same routines of the original to tell the tale, because I've always felt campfire tales are never end. They've been told forever anyway.
Yep. Yep.
But there's a whole other angle that this particular agent was saying is, my buyers are not going to go for discovering a vintage movie and bringing it to life like it's a hidden gem anymore. That angle is not going to work. I need something with a new, fresh approach using these things. So we came up with something pretty cool, and I can't talk about it, but it's going to be, we're in the middle of developing. Hopefully the pitch deck will be done before July's over, and I'll be out in LA in the rooms, as they say. So if anybody has any questions.
We got the inside scoop, though.
Yes, you did.
Before anybody knows.
So if anybody has any questions and you want to leave time, I'm very happy to answer any questions.
And I love it if you would raise your hand so I can see that if you have a question. But I can't, I'm going back. Anybody have a question? Because I can ask another one. Oh, go ahead, Joe. You ask yours because I have another one. Go ahead, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, no, I actually just sent it in the chat, but what I sent was just asking you, I looked at your filmography that Lexi put up, and I noticed you AD'd Vampire's Kiss. I wrote Vampire's Kiss.
Oh, Joe, hey man, how are you? Great.
I don't know if we ever met because I wasn't on the set that often, but how was that experience for you? I mean, I guess you hung out with Bob Bierman, and did you know? Did Barry Shills bring you in, and Barbara Zitwer, or just tell me a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, well, Marcia, go ahead.
No. I was just like, this is great. That you worked on a film.
Marcia Schulman was the casting director on that. She and I went to Richmond College together. So, and she and I were in touch many times, and she introduced me to Barbara and Barry, and then I met Bob Bierman. We all had dinner together about 3 years ago in New York. They mentioned to me that Bob was in town with his wife, but no, Bob was good. He was a good director. It was a good experience running around the city I know the city like the back of my hand. So you tell me a corner, I'll tell you what's on it. So we went around and found some good locations, and we were able to shoot. There was some interesting tension between Bob and Nick at certain points. The most interesting one was where there's a scene in the apartment where Bob wants him to leave the frame so that, and Nick didn't want to leave the frame. and Bob and him got into a little side this conversation. Nick didn't want to leave the frame because he didn't want to leave Bob in any editing capability to cut out something that he was doing. That was the conclusion in the end. So that was an interesting thing. The other interesting tale is the cockroach eating scene, where we had the prop man go out and he found the necessary creatures. Nick insisted on doing real live ones. He found a few different size ones, soaked them in 120 proof Smirnoff overnight. And the next day we get into this little tiny space where he's supposed to be doing it. And we're all like, God, what is he gonna do here? You know, and it's just like me, we're all cramped in this little corner where we're doing it. And it's the camera and the AC and the director and myself and Nick. And so he takes it and he holds it in his hand and we call roll and action. And he kind of chucks it into his mouth. And when it's done, I look at Bierman and Bierman looks at me and we both know the same thing. We didn't see the creature long enough to be able to ascertain that it was a real live creature. Okay. So I had to say, and Bob looked at me, he kind of gave me this look that said, you got to tell him. So I said, Nick, would you mind, can we do one more take? You know, and he had chummed it. He didn't really swallow, he'd spit it out, you know. And then, so he agreed to do one more take. And by the way, Nick went into full character for the entire duration of the movie. When they finally got to his room at the Mayflower Hotel, it looked like the room in the set. The windows were covered with stuff. It was insane. Wow. At any rate, so he agreed to do another one. I just said, you know, maybe you could hold it up and just before we roll, you can give it a little twang with your finger there so we could at least see the antennae moving, you know? So he did so, and you know, he did another one and it got done. So that was another of the funny scenes that took place in there. But no, the other thing, I always felt that there was something that we were missing there I think you had it in and it didn't make it all the way through. And by the way, Maria Conchita Alonso was, what a amazing person. She's such a force of nature. We had some interesting people working on it and it was a lot of fun along those lines. It's just, it was something, I can't remember right now what it was that I always felt it had and that they ignored. Do you remember, Joe? Was there anything that you found that they took out that bothered you?
They filmed the script exactly, word for word. The only thing that was something added, which was I didn't write the cockroach. I wrote something else, and that was Nick's idea. But every other thing, as I recall, wound up in the script. No, I was like unbelievably happy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, it was good. It's a good, people love it. I mean, it's a cult, you know, people think of it as a cult classic and a very unusual movie.
Did you go to that screen? Did you go to the screen at the Museum of Modern Art a few years ago?
Oh, that was when we had the dinner. No, I didn't get that. I was shooting. And by the time I got the information, I met them at some little restaurant downtown. You were not at that? I would have known. I would remember.
I went to that, and I went to a dinner with them too. Anyway, I'll let somebody else ask a question, okay. But I had to just mention that. I was like, oh wow, you worked on that, and I don't remember meeting you, but it's possible. I mean, you know, you know, I was only there. A writer doesn't really go on the set that much, or I didn't. I went like twice. Anyway, awesome, thank you.
Awesome. I guarantee you I was there, though. I promise you that. A pleasure meeting you. So nice of you to let me know that you were there.
Does anybody have a question other than me? Because the question I have is, you know, John Sayles is one of my favorite directors, and he said that when there was the return, he made this Return of the Secaucus 7. And then he made this other film. Then they made another film with a much bigger budget, which now, for the life of me, I can't remember what it is. If anybody remembers, and I remember him being asked, you know, do you feel bad about the fact that they basically took your film and made a big budget version of it without you, you know? And he said no, because I felt as though the marketing for that film has really helped the Return of the Secaucus 7, which I thought was a great answer. So I just wonder, once you found out that other people were making movies that were basically the Cropsey story, do you think that had a positive impact or a negative impact on your own film?
Well, to tell you the truth, what happened was when we got our hands on the script from the other show, The Burning, Joey and I read it and we said, oh, this is too close. So we called our investor and we said, it was like near the weekend. We said, we're going to shut down over the weekend and pull back everybody for now while we ascertain what this is about now and how much we can fix this, because we don't want to drag you into something and end up getting to the American film market and they're ahead of us. They were already 5 weeks ahead of us.
Right.
So we were concerned and we wanted to get his permission to go through that. So we took a break and we went and I remember this was so crazy. Back in the day, Curtain Up, the restaurant over on 42nd at the Actors Building that's over there on 42nd and 9th, was still there. And we sat down, we started eating and drinking and talking and yada, yada. We literally rewrote the tenets of the script with notes on the tablecloth. I had to convince the guy to let us have the tablecloth at the end of the night. I'm still looking for that tablecloth. I'd love to have it. And we came to a conclusion that, okay, we could rejigger the script to make it get away from them and the Cropsey. And we never really mentioned the Cropsey after that. What I did was I went to what was in my head when I was hunting for music, and I went to Holst and I said, Mars, okay, we're going to rename our character MADMAN Mars with a Z. And that's what Joey and I got into when we renamed the character and created our own legend in that respect. And that's where we went from there. And that's how MADMAN Mars got created. Little did I know there was some LA shock jock or somebody that had that name that I heard about later. But it didn't matter. It stuck. The audiences loved it, much to my glee and surprise. They love the opening campfire song. Whenever I go to a convention and stuff, they start singing it and stuff like that.
So great.
Yeah, that's fun stuff. You know, it was really just simple song that they picked up and they enjoyed. The late Tony Fish, who performed it, did a great job. And also Max, who played the role, the guy who played the role of Max, Carl Fredericks. He was a great actor who had done his work with Samuel Beckett. He was a member of Mabu Mines. He recently passed away a couple of years ago, and he left. Tony Fish knew everybody downtown. He was a real cool guy, and he delivered fish to all the major restaurants because he really knew his way around fish. But he knew everybody, and he was in all kinds of great acting groups and dance troupes. He got us, Carl, to come and do this role of playing Max, the camp director. He finished with us and we rushed him to JFK, got on a plane to go out to work with Beckett, which was really very interesting stuff. I mean, you know, you never know the bones underneath some of this stuff, you know, when people do these kind of things. So that was a big thing. But, you know, again, every curveball, every knuckleball, everything that can come your way will come your way when you're trying to get something done. The universe is not interested in another story being told on film. You got to really fight your way to it. You know, the last thing I did, we had, you know, Rally Caps, which is in post now, which is a 10-year-old boy goes to try out his first time. He's in a baseball family. They're all baseball maniacs. But coach's bat slips and breaks his nose, and his confidence, and he spends the rest of the movie trying to get his confidence back. And he has a kind of a disarrayed family with his father gone and his brother and mom in arguments. And it's a nice family drama. What's interesting about that, and I'm jumping to this only because of the exigencies of the business can work to you, for you, or against you. It's got a very big deaf component in it. A couple of the kids, the people that wrote the script are involved with that. And there's a couple of kids with cochlear implants. And it becomes part of it. And then I'm turning around and I'm looking at the Academy Awards last year and I'm seeing Coda winning. And I'm saying, knowing how Hollywood loves to copycat, I'm wondering whether or not we'll get a little bit of help from that in some way. Oh, wow, deaf movies are in. I mean, we had what is the metal movie that what's his name did?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, the last
Sound of Metal. Sound of Metal.
In the last couple of years, deafness has become like a thematic thing that's out there, and it seems to be catching something. You know, there's an essence floating in the air. So maybe the zeitgeist of that will help us get a deal from one of the streamers or somebody like that.
Right.
So, you know, we got our fingers crossed, but it's still, you know, post, man, we just, you know, we started off at 25 to 150K, really small, which I told my people that I was working, I said, you can't do it for this. I don't care what you say. You got, children, you got 2 baseball teams, 18 kids,
Oh my
18
God.
minors, and then 18, and then parents to go along with them.
Yeah.
And you want to shoot in LA, okay? And then you want to shoot in upstate New York where we have a camp. I said, it's not possible, but we kept going and going and going.
Wow.
Then along came an LA producer who my writer knew, and she got us Judd Hirsch and Amy Smart.
Oh my.
And the whole game changed.
Wow.
All of a sudden we had something, even though it wasn't a total, it wasn't like a turnkey thing where you got Judd and automatically you get money, but people will definitely take your call. And it put us in a better position to raise more money, and we raised more money and the budget went up, and we just had to keep in our tier. We broke out of our.
You could feed the kids. Thank goodness.
Well, nobody got fed. No, all the money went in the movie. No, but we did good in the end. And, but the mandate from them was you have to shoot in LA, okay, for them, because they want to be near home. Okay, this is the usual shtick. If you get involved with stars, just understand something. Number one, you don't want their tail to wag your dog, which is very hard to stop sometimes. Number two, whatever amount of money you're going to pay them, add at least 30% to that for all of the various things that will come along with it. The perks, the makeup artist they want. I mean, right away, you're going to have to pay SAG bond on a much higher level than you would have been paying with lower actors. So you got to add 30%. If it's $100,000, it's going to be 130 at least. So people aren't aware of that. When SAG went after us for the bond in the middle of COVID, when they were freaking short on capital coming in, they kicked our ass. They hit us with a $50,000 bond on this little movie. So we just got it back, thank God. But it's an interesting thing. So what they did, quick little story. So what happens? The agents demand this stuff. We got to put them, we have to have them near where they live. Okay, fine. Judd lives in Santa Monica. She lived somewhere, we were told, in LA. When we finally got the deal done, I suddenly find out, well, Judd doesn't want to be traveling back and forth from Santa Monica every day, even though we pick him up. He wants to be in a hotel near the place. So, and it has to be 5-star. So suddenly I'm booking them into the, whatever you want, $5,000 a week hotels.
Right.
She suddenly doesn't really live in LA per se. She lives in Michigan, in Leland, which is a small town. Her husband is got a very popular home fix-up show. I can't remember his name right now. I should, because I booked her ticket under Amy Smart, and then she couldn't deal with it because she doesn't travel under that name. She travels under her Uslander or something like that, Amy Uslander. How would you know? Nobody told me. The agent didn't tell me.
She didn't tell you.
She didn't tell me till it was too late. I had a whole bunch of stuff to deal with last minute.
Oh my God.
And so further, we only have 3 days to work with them. We have a weekend to deal with them. Well, that's the first act of the script. Luckily, the script was split in that way. So it was 30 pages of work, but we had to shoot 30 pages in 3 days with the stars, which we ended up pulling off. And it's literally the first act of the movie, which was a very interesting, lucky break for us in that respect. So we finished shooting then, and then we didn't get back to shooting till September in New York with various delays. You had to get to this camp, which turned out in the way to be a lucky thing, because it was the best time to be in upstate New York for weather. The lake is the warmest after a summer of sun. The rain is the least. The temperatures are reasonable, and got away with murder and knocked off the rest of the movie in 10, 12 days, which, but again, you had to bring 18 minors, their parents, their guardians, okay, right away, plus the rest of the actors up to this camp, which we housed everybody in the camp facility and had to convince them that this was okay. Meanwhile, in the middle of frickin' COVID, where the bunks are all open air bunks, and it was just, again, sorry, it's war.
Gotta be creative.
It's war. There's no other way. It's battles and battles and war. Production is war. I can't tell you any other thing.
What I hear is being creative. It's just, the production side of it. People think that the creativity is in the script writing or in the directing or whatever. And I'm always like, you don't understand. You know, producers are the most creative. The everything that you have to deal with and have to solve, it's like it has to use every single part of your brain
Right.
to be able to solve all of that.
You know,
You know,
everybody,
it's amazing.
all levels like that. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, the other thing is actors, you know, just as a note, as an assistant director for 30 something more years, uh, there's a great tendency to forget why you're there. You're there for the actors. With
Mhm.
all of this creativity coming from the producers and all of the great, incredible ideas and ways of getting out of or into good thing, getting out of bad things into good things, making it whole together. The ultimate reason is to create a stage, you know, an operating room, literally. I mean, I've created an operating room in the middle of Times Square for things so that my actors could have the sense of peace that they can work in. And most people who are studying acting, they don't give them a course like this, which I always say, and maybe they do and I'm not aware of it. Make them do some acting in the middle of a really disturbing place. As a
Uh-huh.
film actor, make them understand that you're not going to get that moment to go do your little whatever you do. You know, you're going to have to get out there and bring it from the trailer to the set and ignore everything. Even if I try to stop it, I can't stop everything, you know. And a lot of actors get rattled, and young actors get rattled. They know, I didn't get my moment. I couldn't prepare. I said, no, you don't, it doesn't work that way. You know, you got to just deliver, you know. It's ultimate fighting challenge time. You know,
Yeah,
you're in the
I posted
octagon.
a story recently about Alexander Skarsgård apparently begging to be taken out of this cold mud making the Northman, and I posted it just because I thought you can get to be Alexander Skarsgård and your director still forgets that, you know, you're dying there in the icy mud, and you know he's sort of like, help,
Absolutely.
help.
No,
You know.
these days it would be easy to cut a quick little 5 minute. So here's the glamour, kids. You know,
Yes.
okay, you know, and look, even if you get something like you're doing, like doing the Queen or something like that, where you think she gets into that outfit in 10 minutes, you know, there's 2.5 hours of dressing her at the
Mm,
very least, and another hour or two of making her up before you
mhm.
can get to the set, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
So it's real serious work, especially these days. Um, we're very demanding now as an audience. I mean, everybody wants it to click, and you know, they're just expecting things.
Yeah.
The only thing, you know, I've noted, look, you can get away, and I tell this all the time, you can get away with a little bit of a bad picture, but you
Yeah,
can't get away with bad sound.
never.
You've got to have really good sound. People will forgive you if the picture isn't perfect. You know, they'll say it's style, you know, but sound has got to work, you know. So that's an important thing. Don't short yourself on a decent sound person. And there's much you can do in post these days. I mean, it's incredible what you can do with post. I
Yeah.
mean, you can get to the most granular level with both image and sound, but you know, you got to have something to work with. That's all I can
Yeah.
say along those lines. So I can go on and on. So it's up to
No,
you. Any other
Gary,
questions?
thank you. Thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much.
My
What
pleasure.
fun. I mean, really, I could listen to you all day.
Oh, I
And
love when you talk that way. Most women don't speak that way to me anymore. So. But it's always nice to hear. And I'm happy to hear you're back in Miami. That's a big change. You were in Pacific Northwest, weren't you?
I was in Montana.
Oh, goodness.
I was in San Francisco, and then I hid out for COVID. I hid out in Montana. I fell in love with Montana, and now I'm back in Miami, and just about to buy an apartment.
Oh, Mazel Tov. Good for you.
Yes.
Good luck down there. I hear it's insane trying to buy stuff. I mean, people tell me you put money down and the next thing you know, somebody's outbid you. But where you getting one? In what part of town?
North Bay Village.
Oh, I know it well. Yeah, good place. Enjoy.
But you know, it's still. We just did the inspection yesterday. But yes, so I just am settling in Miami. I just spoke to somebody at the Miami Film Commission yesterday. I'm speaking to somebody at Miami-Dade Community College tomorrow. So just, you know,
Well,
getting
talk to
getting
my
set.
friend Adrian Garcia. He was one of
Okay.
my students when I was at U of M.
Uh
And
huh.
that was many years ago. I was teaching some workshops there, and he has gone on to become a well-respected tenured professor at MDC.
Ah, okay.
It's not community college now. It's Miami-Dade College. They're a 4-year
College.
school.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
I was just working with him on a small project. So he's a good guy, and he can give you some stuff. There's also a thing called Filmgate down there.
Yep, Diliana,
Yeah,
Alexandra.
right.
I've taught there a few times
Yeah,
because I've been coming back to Miami over the years.
right.
I've been coming back, and yes, now I'm
Town is
here.
busy right now. It's not the same. Uh, Vince Vaughn is there with a series called Bad Monkey, and they're down
Mm,
to their ninth or 10th episode. They're about to wrap. It is one of those monster series that comes into Miami and sucks up the entire crew. All the
right.
main people are working, and the assistants are all working. I was trying to get a low budget student film thing kind of done, and it was impossible to find people.
Wow.
For
And
that
the
reason and
thing,
one other, the other reason, which is interesting to me, is the change in the business of indie filmmaking has
uh-huh,
swept up all of the young people who I would normally have made deals with. Hey, you were the best boy. You can gaff this, but you're trading credit for cash. I
uh-huh,
can't give you what you would get, but you would get the opportunity to have the credit. And
uh-huh.
I've done a number of indies in that manner. That ability is falling, not becoming possible anymore because people are simply making stuff. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they're getting their cutting their teeth that way. And that whole style of making movies now is so different now, what you can do with the kind of gear we have that's also light. And, you know, from iPhones to, Alexas, you can get away. And all these cameras are everywhere now. You could never get an Arri to your own handling. People go out and buy Reds and they buy Black Magics, and all of those things are perfectly capable of making broadcast quality and theater quality movie. And these days, who's going to a theater with indies? I mean, you're not even getting the opportunity. We're all going to streamers. So it's going to play on a 75-inch TV is the biggest it's going to see.
Right, right,
So,
right.
you know, so it changes the whole nature of it. But anytime, you know, I'll be happy to drop back again if you like and talk on a specific subject if you want.
Nice, thank you. And there are a couple of shows also in town. David Makes Man, which was
Right,
written by Terrell Alvin, who I can never remember his last name. Anyway, the person who originally wrote the play that Moonlight was based on.
right.
HBO made a series also set in the projects called David Makes Man, which I think is the most sophisticated psychological drama that I've ever seen. And then Issa Rae's new show, Rap Shit, is just about to be released, and that was set also that is also set and produced in Miami. So very interesting.
Yeah, songs incentives.
Yeah, no,
It's,
I
it's
mean,
interesting, you know, that they're going there. Thank God. I mean, look, I've always, and as of you, had a something's been stuck in my craw as why Miami blew it and handed the gold to Atlanta. And Miami had everything coming out of Miami Vice,
yep,
which drew all this action to the town,
yep,
followed by other things. And then the incentive was bringing people there.
yep.
How they could not have the wisdom to build a few studios, not just rely on making people retrofit a few.
By the way, everybody listening in on this is the Miami conversation that we've been having for decades. So,
And of all the towns, it's a real estate place.
yeah,
All these high rollers live there. There's plenty of money. And oh, they're going to take the Air Force Base and make something. They're going to use this place. For God's sakes, cut out a swath of land and put up a studio. I mean, I worked at Palm Beach Ocean when they first built that. Why they would put it up there in Palm Beach out of the zone where most people were working, so you had to pay them more money to go there, is anybody's guess. Well, I know the answer. They said they had a soap opera coming up because the guys behind it were whatchamacallit, what's it called? Not MGM, Screen Gems. They were
mhm,
always making soap operas. So they were bringing up a South American soap opera, which now there are many running around. They run regularly in Florida, but it never transpired. And so it just became this huge, gorgeous, brand new studio. I did some of the making of whatchamacallit, with Barry Sonnenfeld. We did the pilot for Maximum Bob, and we used that there as a studio for some things and ran around a lot. But now it's just some kind of it's some financial group is in there. They were using it for rehearsals and stuff. So they blew that one. And nothing else. There's some studio called Gravity up in Fort Lauderdale, and there's talk of making another real studio in Fort Lauderdale. You should see Sandy Leiterman while you're there. She's now running the Fort Lauderdale Film Commission.
And she's just announcing new tax incentives for Broward County.
Right, they've done it
So
locally.
she built the Miami-Dade tax incentives back, and now she's doing
Yep.
it in Broward,
Yes.
and perhaps even more.
Well, here's the problem with Florida. There's two things that went on with the tax incentive. One reason it doesn't work well there from a finance person's perspective is Florida has no income tax.
Right.
Where is the bread coming from to give back to people?
Mhm.
Any of the people that do serious
Mm.
tax work and serious financial thinking saying, wait a minute, we don't have anything to take it from. We're taking from our actual treasury here. We're not taking it from tax money. We're giving people a break. So that bothered them. And then there was this business with the Koch brothers
Yeah.
and
Koch
the sugar people who basically supposedly did something to force everything out of there. They took the money that would have gone to this kind of stuff and forced it to Georgia. So what's a mother to do? We're just stuck with that, and it is what it is.
I mean, so over my head, because I happen to know the person who's the lobbyist for Yahtzee, and I got to ask him over lunch one day, why would you not fight for the tax incentives? And he was like, we don't want those. I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense.
Well,
But it's politics at some level, or
Absolutely.
corruption at some level that, maybe.
well, IA down there 47, the boys are not loving them too much. They don't feel that they're really taken care of. The DGA, you can't get better for a guild or a union. Maybe the Writers Guild is pretty good too, but the DGA is the top of the line when it comes to protecting their members and doing the right thing. So
Right.
along those lines, which by the way, a little secret I'll tell people, if you're planning to be a director, the only position in the DGA that doesn't require 600 days of call sheets and production reports and checks and letters is being a director. There is no requirement in the DGA to be a member as a director other than somebody who is a DGA signatory hiring you to direct their movie. And you might have to show that you directed a high school play or that but basically they don't pay a lot of attention to it. You just have to be asked to direct and pay the initiation fee. So
Can you direct your own film and become a member, or do you have to be hired?
if you create an arm's length company that becomes a signatory to the DGA, they could theoretically hire you. Why not? They can do that.
Wow.
And another way to get in, if you're on a fast track trying to do it, is if you have PA experience and production experience, you can go in as what they call an incumbent, which means you get hired by a DGA signatory and put on staff. And so technically you're only allowed to work with them on that movie or any other movies they do, but you can get right in and get DGA benefits and be part of the DGA like that and avoid tons of, but eventually you'll have to come up with some paperwork, and it's literally 600 days.
Right.
And they don't take it digitally. They still want them in the
Yeah.
big ass 3-inch binders. By the
Yeah.
time you're done, you got 4 binders that weigh
Right.
about 50 pounds that you have to ship up to them to look through.
Yeah.
Because it's not the DGA that looks at it. It's a third-party company to protect them from any kind of lawsuit liability as to being favoritism.
It's like some kind of audit company or something.
Yes, it's at a distance. It's what at arm's length or whatever. But
Right.
and they take it seriously. They go through it, page by page. And
Wow.
so there you go. Anyway,
Harry, so much
my
fun.
pleasure.
I've
Yeah,
never just
absolutely.
sat here and just hung out and had a conversation while everybody just listened in, so we could kvetch about Miami.
Yeah, well, that's true too. I've done a few of these. It's always